Hey, folks. We thought we would have a conversation. This is my friend, the anarchist playwright, Brent Lengel. And we thought we would just react to that, I guess you could call it epic or problematic debate that just happened with Vaush, the game streaming, video game playing anarchist or whatever. What are your thoughts, Brent? I know what I think, but I was there. I was part of it, so I want to hear from you.
It hurts me to hear you call him an anarchist. I know he calls himself that, so that's okay. But
Yeah.
God, that was cringy. I don't know if you've noticed, but I am wearing my star, well-known fascist symbol. And for anybody that is literally, I'm kidding.
Right. Yeah.
But like that was ridiculous. I'm genuinely annoyed at it because Vaush. I've been a follower of his for a while in that I followed his videos and I found some of his content to be pretty good and some of it to be okay. And then occasionally he'll say some weird stuff and I'm like, wait a minute, aren't you supposed to be an anarchist? Where did that come from? But I just assumed like, maybe he just wasn't 100% connecting things, or maybe he was speaking and it just wasn't there were some things and some red flags that I have until this conversation you've had with him completely ignored. But yeah, maybe I shouldn't have been.
Well, I mean, obviously the part that stands out the most is, I'm sorry, but how many times has the US government lied about a country that they're trying to escalate tension with, put new sanctions on, or get us into a war? To add up all those times, it would probably be in the hundreds. You can go back to the Spanish-American War. You can go back, when they had photographs of prisoners that were actually taken in New York City to, William Randolph Hearst said, I'll supply the photographs, you supply the war, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, go down the line.
Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Yeah, but if you question it, you're a Nazi. That's his argument. That is so ridiculous. The Holocaust is one of the most well-documented events in world history, and it was tankies who rolled into those camps at Auschwitz and revealed it to the world. And it was tankies who were raising the alarm. It was pro-Soviet communists who were raising the alarm about what was going on in Spain, about what was going on in Germany, about what was going on in Italy, long before U.S. mainstream media was. It was U.S. mainstream media that was downplaying the crimes of fascism. So the idea that the crimes of fascism mean we should always believe mainstream media, no, it means we should believe the tankies is what it means. It makes me hate Holocaust deniers. I really will say that, because you can't deny the Holocaust. It is so factually obvious, and the fact that they have done everything they can to equate anyone who questions U.S. military narratives now with the despicable minority of people in the world that question the greatest crime of the 20th century, it shows how much damage has been done, right? And now there's a lot of people. Vaush sounds like a neocon to me. He called me. How many times did he call me anti-American? And then he tried to say, I'm anti-American too, but you're anti-American. Well, you're an anarchist. You should be more anti-American than I am. I'm anti-American, and everyone the USA goes up against is the same as Hitler. My goodness, neocon thinking, neocon narratives have really seeped into left-wing circles. That's what I take out of this. But go ahead, tell me what you think.
No, it reminded me a little bit of my old talk radio days. Like, occasionally I'll be on the Ed Till show still, and he helped me get my own show, which was Insurrection with Brenton Lengel. And, I always try to have a higher level of discourse, either if it's online or in a debate or something than what I saw. But, the idea to so you and I, we've been friends for years, since before you were with RT, when you were with Press TV and Occupy Wall Street. And to hear, and granted, he did not know this history of you. He didn't see you out in the streets doing the thing like that I and everyone at Occupy saw. He didn't see you defending Cecily McMillan. He didn't see your coverage of Occupy. And he also didn't see when RT was the only network that could be counted on to reliably cover Occupy and to put us on in such a way that, we weren't just being put out there to trash. Which leads me to believe he's very, very new to the left and the activist movements. Maybe I'm just getting old and Occupy was so long ago, 2012, that's almost a decade ago. But you've really put in the time and you have the receipts to know that you are on the side of the workers, and you've been on the side of the workers for as long as I've known you. And it was an absolutely ridiculous accusation. And I was just like sitting there on the other end like this.
Well, but it's not about me, Brent. Okay, let's
Yeah.
be clear about this. I'm one guy. I make videos on the internet. I do TV reporting or whatever. I was on there to defend the legacy of my comrades, not just the comrades that I have known over the years in my work with leftist groups, but my comrades who fought, to defend the Spanish Republic from Franco, my comrades who built the civil rights movement long before anyone had ever heard of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, the Civil Rights Congress, Henry Winston, Helen Keller, who built the disability rights movement. I mean, she was a tankie, according to him. Nelson Mandela is a tankie. I mean,
this was actually, yeah. And this was really interesting because you were bringing up like all of these huge names from history, and he was trying to say that it was an appeal to authority, which no, that's not how an appeal to authority works.
Right.
Like an appeal to authority is when the authority in question is not a relevant authority to what you're talking about. So like if I say, for instance, oh, this medicine that supposedly treats coronavirus definitely treats coronavirus, the president said so.
Right.
That's an appeal to authority.
Right.
But you need to use history when you are trying to establish like what is a movement. And a good example of this is arguments that we've had in the anarchist community disproving, the fact that, for instance, so-called anarcho-capitalists are anarchists. You go, okay, so what's an anarchist? There's two ways you can go. You can go to one, like the etymology of the word, or two, you say, okay, what is anarchism in practice? What has it been understood to be for, since its inception from Pierre-Joseph Proudhon? And you go back and you look at like the actual DNA of the movement. You look at the people in the movement. You say, okay, society and history says that's an anarchist. And so like you get up to the top, and ANCAPs will do the same thing where I'm like, okay, look, your ideology doesn't even come through Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. You're more into Bastiat and the classical liberal tradition. They'll say, appeal to authority. I can be an anarchist if I want to. It's the same. It's the exact same argument, and it hurt me deep on like a deep level to see Vaush like push that because it's such a dumb argument.
I mean, even like he threw this Marx quote in about the Paris Commune that was like arguing for the opposite of what he said. At one point, I'm sure one of his fans in the chat like threw it to him, right? Sent him this quote, and he's like, well, we must not just, take hold of the ready-made state machinery. That's Marx arguing that you need a new state, like a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's a very statist, authoritarian Marxist quote. That's not, I mean, he completely, and I'm sure he'd never read that. He'd, just taken it out of context. I mean, the whole thing was just a farce. And I mean, I can understand his concern about, when people around the world say they're being oppressed, you should take them seriously. And I do take the allegations against China seriously. I do, and I've read that. One thing I do know for a fact is that in China, they've outlawed beards, right? That if you have a big, long beard, yeah, that's considered to be the hottest.
Am I outlawed in China?
No, I think it has to be really long. But regardless, that's not cool. That's not okay. In my view, if your religion says you can have a big, long beard, you should be able to have it, in my view. But I'm not in charge of China. I'm not there. But also he seems to just kind of gloss over the idea that China might have some legit concerns, right? That, I mean, how many Uyghurs went to Syria to fight alongside ISIS against Assad, right? And there were a number of Uyghurs who were on their way back to mainland China who were stopped at the border because Chinese authorities thought they had ties to ISIS. There have been these knife attacks, right? We all know that, and I mean, our government certainly in response to terrorist attacks goes way overboard, right? And takes people's rights away. And if China's doing that, that's wrong, right? They shouldn't do it. But our government does the same thing. And he kept, insisting that what was happening in the Uyghur regions, he knows for a fact is the equivalent of Hitler's Holocaust. And it's like, I've never heard there's a number that's been thrown around of 2 to 3 million people being detained, right? And that number comes from two sources. One is a U.S. Human rights organization that only relied on media reports. The second is a fundamentalist pastor, a Christian evangelical fundamentalist pastor, Adrian Zenz, who says he's on a campaign. God has directed him on a campaign against China. But that's 2 to 3 million. The Holocaust was 6 million Jews, 8 million others, and millions more killed in a catastrophic war. Even the most anti-China voices are not equating what China does with Hitler, right? And so to just because I'm not willing to jump on his bandwagon of equating the largest country in the world in terms of population with the greatest mass murderers in history, because I won't do that, I'm the same as Richard Spencer? Is he out of his mind? You can't protest wars now. That's basically what he's saying. The only way you can oppose war is on a kumbaya pacifist basis. You're not allowed, when Trump gets up and says we have to invade Venezuela because Maduro just, killed 700 people and ate their brains. If I say, is that true? Shut up, you're a Nazi. I mean, he's the best. This is neoconservatism. This is John Bolton. This is Elliot Abrams. This is neocon ideology, right?
If
this man calls himself a leftist.
Yeah, I don't know if he's necessarily a neocon. I think he's just incoherent. Because I think he would probably. I think he would probably oppose any kind of military action like that. Like, I haven't seen his opinion on Venezuela or anything, but it does show you the standard. I think he went in there with the intent to smear you.
Of course.
It was really frustrating because literally just before that, he had a stream with freaking Count Dankula, this guy who taught his pug to Sieg Heil, and he treated that guy way better with way more good faith than he ever treated you, a freaking comrade. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what that says about Vaush, if he's just. So here's the thing, though, and I did want to get into this. I'm going to make a video about this soon, because there was a big mistake he made, and my head, if I had had a keyboard in front of me at the time, my head would have landed on the keyboard. And that was when he said that China was fascist because the state was working with corporations and the state had control of the economy. This is a really common misunderstanding of what fascism is, and you described fascism very well in economic terms, but I really wish I had been there to just jump in and give the background on this one, why he made this argument. Because the argument is, whenever anybody first starts to look up fascism and tries to understand what it is, and it's notoriously hard to understand because it makes no sense and is internally incoherent. What they do is they Google what is fascism, and first they get the dictionary definition, and then they get the Mussolini quote. And the Mussolini quote is,
fascists are always honest about what they believe, right?
Yeah, but even with the Mussolini quote, even if we take him at his word, it doesn't mean what Vaush thinks it means. Mussolini said, fascism was the fusion of state and corporate power. But when he's talking about that, he doesn't mean corporations in the sense that we mean them today. When people say, "Oh, we don't have capitalism, we have corporatism." No, corporatism is a very specific form of government where it doesn't have anything to do with corporations. That's corporatocracy. Corporatism is where each sector of the economy functions as though it were a part of a body. So a hand is different from the heart, and the heart is different from the tongue and the foot. There's even a verse in the Bible about this, and that's where a lot of corporatist ideas come from. So if you want to think of fascism as a fusion of state and corporate power, think of it as big fascist guy around a big table with, there's a seat for teachers, and there's a seat for engineers, and there's a seat for clergymen. That's corporatism. That's what, and not all corporatism is fascist. Fascism just happens to have corporatist elements in it, in Italian fascism and a few others.
Well, right. And that's what I was struck when he said that's what fascism was. I thought, well, gee, that would apply to every capitalist country in the world. That it was out of the blue. Well, I'm going to pick this one little quote. That's what fascism is. Therefore, China is fascist. I mean, it was pretty ridiculous. I mean, one moment that was particularly shocking to me is it was he was hoping he could get me to say something transphobic. And yeah. I spoke from the heart. I feel compassion for trans people. Trans people get beaten up. There are hate crimes against them. Their parents kick them out of their homes. I just said, no, the hatred and discrimination that trans people face is awful. And he's just like, oh, shit. Oh,
yeah, destroyed 50%
what about trans surgery? Are you okay with transgender surgery? And I said, yeah, it's none of my business. If an adult wants to get transgender surgery, if they feel like that's a way to address their dysphoria or whatever, I don't know I'm not an expert, right? Maybe that word dysphoria I just used, maybe that's not correct. I am not educated on the issue, and I don't pretend to be. But I mean, why? Well, how does it bother me? I mean, what was he expecting me to say? Gas all trans people, Sig Heil. I mean, Sig China. I mean, it's despicable. I mean, it just shows he had no idea who he was dealing with. You know what I'm saying? He really didn't. I expected there would be more personal attacks. I mean, he made some comment about my wife at the end. Did you hear that? That was wacky.
No, I missed that. I think I.
It was like he said, "And your wife," and I'm just like, okay, like what are we talking about? It just didn't even make any sense. But it's like I expected more character assassination. I expected everything I've seen on the dark corners of Twitter to be, in my face. I was prepared for it. I actually feel pretty good about the debate, honestly. I mean, I feel like at the beginning, I got out what I wanted to say, which is when you tanky bait, when you call for special bans for people who defend socialist countries, you're essentially talking about some of the greatest progressives in U.S. history. I said that, not everything that you say about China is necessarily true, and I knew I wasn't going to convince him about China, right? I mean, this is a guy, he said many times that his vision of socialism is everything being exactly the same way it is, except everyone's an equal shareholder in the corporation, right? It's just every business is a worker co-op. Well, that's not socialism because the market is still in control, right? Worker co-ops could make weapons and have a military-industrial complex. Worker co-ops could pollute the environment to make their products more efficiently and cheaply, right? Worker co-ops are great.
Have you heard of the co-op war? That happened in the United States. Oh my Lord. Okay. There's a great podcast called The Dollop. They do a deep dive on it. I'll send it to you, but it is crazy. And it's these like hippies in, I think, Minnesota got sick of paying too much for groceries at the capitalist grocery store. So they started their own kind of worker co-op grocery store. And it wound up growing and growing and getting pretty big. And then it sort of ran into all the problems that you have with the left, that like we saw with like Occupy, when there was a lot of infighting and two members of the co-op went off and decided they weren't anarchists anymore. Now they're Marxists. And they started like literally fighting each other in the streets, vandalizing I think there was a firebomb involved at some point, or a firebombing attempt. Anyway, this it fell to all of the normal things that happen in business, just was also a co-op. But now here was the really interesting thing is, and I'm going to be spoiling things a little bit, but you get to the end of it and you find out that the whole thing was basically a cult. And not only was the whole thing a cult, the cult leader was working for the CIA.
Wow.
The entire time manipulating these people.
Now,
and
is this the same thing? I know in Wisconsin for a while there was some kind of Maoist cult that ran the co-ops. Is that the one?
It might have been that. I don't know. It was like Wisconsin, or I was thinking Minnesota.
Okay. Yeah. No, I've heard about this through word of mouth. People say, "Oh, I'm from Minnesota. I'm from Wisconsin," and all the co-ops were run by CO or something, and then I can never figure out who that is, and there's nothing on Wikipedia, and I've always wondered about that. It's like this part of lefty lore I've heard. You got to send me this podcast. I'm curious to hear.
I'll send it. You should totally listen to it. It's hilarious and really strikes a chord with me as somebody who was involved in a lot of leftist organizing. I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely happened. And but the thing was, the guy was working for the CIA or the FBI, and also he had gotten to a level of prominence where he was telling people within the organization who to marry and when to have kids and all that kind of weird stuff.
Yeah, that's what happens when these groups get wacky. I mean, it's funny. I think it was it at your recommendation or at a friend of mine's recommendation? I watched the Netflix on Waco, which was very good. And then I watched Wild Wild Country. And it's funny because I've done a lot of reading about these various religious cults and stuff. And if you look at it, what was happening was that, there was this huge progressive upsurge in U.S. society in the late 60s and early 70s. And it was defeated largely. I mean, the Black Panthers were crushed, Students for a Democratic Society and the Maoist movement, very depressing story about what they
Fred
did.
Hampton.
So, after that, there seemed to be a lot of these kind of utopian communities that sprung up. And a lot of them were run by the CIA. I mean, the Moonies, the Church of Reverend Sun Myung Moon. I mean, they were designed to look like leftists, but they were hard right-wing anti-communists, working with South Korean and Japanese intelligence. And
they run the Washington Times, right? Or they did until recently.
And the New Yorker Hotel as well. Yeah. And then a lot of these kind of utopian communities sprung up, and it was a response to the defeat of socialism. There's a great documentary called The Bastards of the Party that was on HBO that talks about when the Black Panthers were broken up by the FBI. A lot of what was left of the Black Panthers degenerated into criminal drug dealing, organizations because that's what happens. And it's a real tragedy to see that has happened on so many occasions. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty wild. And of course, the hands of the state is always involved in all of this. I mean, there's a good book called Gangs and Counter Gangs, and it was written by the leader of British intelligence in Kenya. When the people of Kenya rose up against the British, the Land and Freedom Army, they were derogatorily called the Mau Mau, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the British realized they had a bit of an optics problem because all their soldiers were white and the Kenyans were black. So they'd show up in an area to fight the Land and Freedom Army or the Mau Mau, and wouldn't go so well. The population would support the Land and Freedom Army. So what they started doing is hiring people from rival ethnic and tribal groups, giving them guns and saying, okay, you're now the Kenyan Liberation Army. You hate the British too, but the Mau Maus are a bunch of phonies, right? They're not really anti-imperialists. They're the ones people should be fighting, right? You know, and that was counter gangs, and it was something that they did. And to tie this back to Vaush, I got my questions about Vaush, my suspicions about him get even more intense now. I mean, he laid it out there. If you don't buy into lies used to promote war, if you question media allegations against a country, you're a Nazi. I cannot think of something that Langley and the CIA would try to insert into leftist discourse more than that. I mean, that is perfect for them. And there's a historical precedent for it, right? I mean, look at the Congress for Cultural Freedom and how they worked really, really hard to create the idea that the Communist Party USA were fascists. I mean, Vaush, I hope he's just a guy like me. That would be great. If he's just a guy like me, he's got a YouTube channel. Someone said he has a rich Hollywood dad. Well, you know, my dad doesn't agree with what I do. I mean, your dad doesn't agree with what you do. I mean, it's nobody's fault who their dad is. But I hope that he's just a deeply misinformed, confused person. I hope there's nothing more sinister going on beneath the surface, because that would be not good.
You know, what I can say is So, you know, he claims to be a libertarian socialist, and I am a libertarian socialist, you know, coming from the anarchist tradition. I think I may have spent more time in the movement than he has, and more time kind of understanding that and time in the streets, which puts us in very different perspectives. I could see myself, particularly if I'd spent some time recently arguing against Nazis, getting paranoid. And, you know, because on the surface, it can look similar when you say, like, oh, I have problems with the official story here. Yeah, fascists say the same thing, but there's a totally different context that you have. Like with the Weigars, I honestly looked into it after that because it's been going on, and I have no problem believing that the Chinese government is doing terrible things to a religious and ethnic minority. Yeah, I mean, that's what governments do. um, in fact, you mentioned like the beard law. That reminds me of like, when I was studying Native American history in the United States, the way the U.S. government like went about carrying out its genocide, it wasn't just straight up killing. It was the idea that to conquer a people, what you did was you eliminated their culture. So the different, their religion was made illegal. Their modes of dress were made illegal. Probably the way they cut their hair or other specific things were made illegal. But again, that would be then saying, you could then take that argument and say, okay, so the U.S. government is fascist and the Stalinists are fascist. Everybody's fascist. And then World War II was just fascists fighting fascists. It's insane, especially freaking Woody Guthrie was singing about how great the Soviets and the Chinese were because they were helping us beat fascists.
Yeah, well, the Chinese government admits that, especially in the 60s, they made really big mistakes with religious minorities, right? The Cultural Revolution, which was bad. I mean, it was bad, right? Part of it was just an all-out war against all religion. Now, they did it to Han Chinese religious sites as well. They destroyed a lot of ancient temples. But in the Tibetan regions, the public, mainly Tibetans, but the public, was mobilized to destroy temples, to persecute priests and Buddhist monks. In the Uyghur regions, there were similar things that were done, and that's wrong. And Catholics were mistreated. Catholic monks were forced to get married and have children. The argument was, if you don't have children, you're not increasing the population, so you're working against socialism. That's not right.
Yeah.
And there's some great documents from the Chinese Communist Party describing how egregious those mistakes were. And people have raised some concerns. I know there was something
Which
going
is
on
more
more
than you
recently.
can expect from like a lot of American governments.
Right.
Our
Dinesh
government
D'Souza
hates.
says we didn't kill the Native Americans on Fox News. We got people on Fox News who say all the Native Americans just died from disease. I mean, it's like, we're still not coming to terms with slavery and the African American community, what was done there. The Vietnam War, people still say it was necessary. I mean, it's like, we're way behind when it comes to admitting our own mistakes. I mean, liberals tend to be better about that than conservatives, but there you go. I mean, it's, and I mean, again, I've never been to the Uyghur regions. I haven't seen it. I just am not ready to. And I've seen a lot of legitimate folks like Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone Project raise questions. And again, why isn't that allowed? I think that the key difference between me and Holocaust deniers is that Holocaust deniers are talking about something that happened 60 years ago, where people can visit the sites, where there's, a war has ended. People are looking into this. There is a whole overall historical consensus, right? They're tampering with it because they want to demonize a specific ethnic group. They want to preach hatred for Jews. And so in order to try and tamper with that, they want to rewrite the history of the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
Whereas
it didn't happen, but I wish it had. Like that kind of crap.
Right. Whereas with me, I'm saying, what about what's going on now? I mean, there you go. And then that raises some other questions. I mean, if you're going to equate any country that makes mistakes regarding ethnic minorities, with the Nazis, what side would you have been on in World War II? Japanese internment, folks. We made huge mistakes with ethnic minorities in the United States during that war. Huge errors were made in how we treated the Japanese community, right? And that didn't make it okay. That didn't make the United States wrong in fighting the Nazis, right? We made mistakes, and we paid reparations to the Japanese community for doing that. The Communist Party USA made big mistakes. They tolerated it and they went along with it. I don't think they should have done that. I think that's one of their bigger mistakes. There's I mean, it's like there's a lot of people that have skeletons in their closet. A lot of countries around the world have skeletons in their closet. And he's right. Okay, there is this internet culture, gulag memes. Big pet peeve of mine. I know people whose ancestors went to gulags. Gulags aren't funny. It's not funny, right? The gulags were horrendous. People suffered. Every historian, every person admits that there were a lot of people in those gulags who didn't belong there. So joking about gulags is a cruel, heartless, nasty internet thing to do, right? And these debates, we did the one
or like the guillotine like memes. Like I used to make those guillotine jokes in like my early groups and stuff and on Facebook and stuff, and sometimes it's fun to confront a liberal who thinks that everything's going to just remain this way and they're going to stay in power as the Republicans or the Democrats, and just be like, yeah, here's a guillotine. But at the same time, I noticed slowly as I was making that, because part of the reason I'd make those jokes was like this happened and we should remember it. And then I noticed there were some people that were just laughing a little too hard at those jokes. And it's the same ones like with the Holocaust jokes and there is using humor to remind yourself of a horrible reality in a safer way. And then there's using humor to make yourself comfortable with that kind of violence again, and they're totally different, and it's really awful. And he is right about that. But yeah, I'm sorry. Continue.
I guess this this culture of on the right, libertarians, they've got the helicopter memes. Communists have the gulag memes, the guillotine memes. I think
trust it to libertarians to suggest killing their political rivals in the most economically inefficient way possible.
It's quite expensive to drop someone out of the helicopter. No question. But I think that it kind of speaks to the wider problem with the debate, which is the darkness of internet culture, right? He couldn't just say, Caleb, I think that you disagreeing with the media narrative about the Uyghur regions is wrong. It had to be, you're the same as Hitler. It's like everything gets amped up to this super emotional level. And it's like, it reminds me of like, Jerry Springer, how he would have like Nazis and the JDL on his show, and they would hit each other with chairs and cuss each other out and the bleeping. And it's like in the hopes of like creating in going viral. You want to go viral. You want everyone to gather around and go, fight, 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 Jerry. And in order to try and create that atmosphere, you lose actual discourse. When I engage with people, my goal is not to emphasize how we're different. It's to emphasize what we might have in common for the most part. I mean, not everyone, obviously, but, that's what I was hoping to do there with Vaush and say, look, and at the beginning, he seemed to get that. He seemed to get that all these very, very important people like Nelson Mandela, Dr. Seuss, Woody Guthrie, that these people were tankies, and that the way he characterizes the USSR, they didn't agree with. And maybe we could agree on issues here like workers' struggles and anti-racism and stuff. And it seemed like the debate was going pretty decently at the beginning, and then he just flew off the rails. And and
I think he went in there.
He said, "I denied, I denied what was going on. I didn't do that. I asked questions about what U.S. media that lies all the time says. That's all I did."
I mean, you probably could have approached it a little bit better. Not because this is the one thing that I will say, like in the case of a minority group that is being oppressed by a state, be that minority group the Uyghurs, be it the Palestinians in Gaza, be it minorities here in the United States. I think when a story about a big horrible thing that's happening to them comes out, you should tend to agree that that horrible thing is happening, just in general, because look at the disparity in power. And so if you're wrong about the horrible thing, and it's actually not happening, it's not so much of a big deal. But if it actually is happening, holy shit, then that's a really big deal. So, I think as far as with the Uyghurs, like I looked up stuff after, because, I'm not educated on this issue. But I looked it up, and the hard thing is like you find like, okay, UN ambassador and 5 countries accuse China of human rights violations and of genocide and stuff. And then you find like, China and 50 other countries, and one of them's Russia, are saying, no, China's doing great. Everything's fine. Nothing's wrong here. And then who's looking into it? You've got Human Rights Watch, which I won't say they're wrong, but Human Rights Watch is a libertarian organization. So it's like, how do you really parse what it is at this point? Like, I mean, maybe this is the problem of the information age. You don't know who to trust unless it's your own eyes.
Well, and you'll notice it doesn't, he kept calling me anti-American and then insisting, I'm okay with you being anti-American.
You're more pro-American than I am.
But, but then you'll notice it doesn't go the other way, right? I mean, if Russia and China were to accuse the United States of some big crime, he would ask for the proof. He would ask for the proof. He would hold them to account, right? That this kind of shows a subtle pro-U.S. mainstream media bias. For example, he went after me for the fact that I work at RT. Well, I said, I'm proud of the work that I do. I'm not on here to represent RT. And that was a low blow. It's just, you don't talk about people's jobs and all that. I don't know what he does for a living. I guess he plays video games.
He does the streaming for a living.
Yeah, you don't go there. And I said,
by the way, he makes like a ridiculous amount of money on the streaming. I'm not going to hold it against him, but
yeah. Well, hey, gotta pay the bills, But the fact that he would go there, I don't think he would go there against somebody who worked for NBC or Fox or one of the networks that said there were weapons of mass destruction and all of that. There's this, or BBC even, a foreign TV network that happens to be from a country that, Western capitalism and imperialism likes. It's just, it's state bias.
Essentially. The BBC is owned by the British government.
It's like his favorite candidate, Joe Biden, right? We shouldn't believe Tara Reid because she tweeted in support of Putin. Well, I don't buy that.
Did he actually do the I doubt Tara Reid's story?
No, he didn't, but he likes Biden and the Biden campaign, and a lot of folks have. And again, that's not legit. If you just say Russia,
I don't know. I'll
China,
let me stop you on that though, real quick, because I don't think I know he was a Bernie bro. I think he's one of the ones he's gotten behind Biden after Bernie was defeated and squeezed out. But like, we can get into that. That's a whole nother thing. But yeah, I just
hoping I would talk about that with him. I didn't think we were going to talk about China for an hour. Yeah. It's just
been in there with like a list. It's like common tanky tropes to try to troll them into saying something horrible. I think that was his strategy.
Yeah, and he tried with the transphobia thing, and I was just being honest about my feelings. I'm not going to hate somebody because of their gender expression or confusion or dysphoria or whatever you want to call it, or their identity, or I don't know the correct words. I'm new to all of this, and there are some people that have said to me, hey, women's sports, or shouldn't people have to wait till they're 18 and all of that? I don't know. My position is I don't know. I just know that I'm against discrimination. I'm against bullying. I see what's done to trans people. I've seen it. There's times I've been on the street and I've seen people, threatening trans people and all of that. That irks me on a personal level. I know that's not right, and that's what I can say about it. That's what I feel confident enough to say, and that's just how I feel. And if people, there's the crowd of people they call the TERFs or whatever, and they don't seem to acknowledge what these people have been through. You know what I mean? And yeah,
I have a lot of sympathy for trans people. Like, I'm cis. I'm in a lot way, living in a very heteronormative way. I have a wife and a child and everything. But also, I've always been weird. And I've always thought differently than people and had different priorities. And my entire life, people have tried to put me into a box and say, no, 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 you should be this. And I can only imagine how much somebody who is a trans person goes through with that. Like, I remember a kid in my high school, like, he literally said we should take all the gay people, put them on an island, and then nuke it. Like, in my high school.
I heard similar things.
Yeah, if I had been trans when I was going to high school, my life would have been in danger from those people, and like, to sit there and like say, I really do hate how people try to bully them right now, because like, since we've agreed that gay people are okay mostly as a society, now the next enemy is the trans people, and it's disgusting. And also, like, I mean, you heard me in the Stryker debate, like, I brought up Nature Journal. The science is very clear. These people are not making it up. They're not just crazy.
Well, and here's the thing though, right? And this points to exactly the issue in the conversation, is that there are some people that are just too cowardly to hate people more powerful than them. Let's get real, right? Who is it easier to hate? The U.S. government, the billionaire ruling class, or some transgender homeless person? You know what I mean? Who is it easier to hate? A low-income welfare mother, or a big corporation that gets lots of money from selling weapons, right? And they're part of this authoritarianism is that these people have just been trained to be afraid of people that are powerful, to admire people that are powerful and rich and strong, and to pour whatever resentment and anger they have out on people who can't defend themselves or people who are in a weaker position. And it's a big problem, but it fits in with what Vaush is doing, right? I mean, he pours all his rage out against a country on the other side of the world, China. Hello, I'm worried about what the U.S. government is doing with drones killing people, trying to stage coups in Venezuela. Is it more honorable? Where have I heard him denouncing U.S. foreign policy? I'm sure if he was here right now, he'd say, oh, I denounce. But where do I see him? I don't see him on the front lines with Venezuela. I don't see him on the front lines exposing, the fact that Saudi Arabia is bombing and destroying Yemen. And mainstream media has largely covered up for that. I mean, I don't see him waving a flag against the crimes of his own government. But then he would say such nasty things about me because I'm not ready to jump on the bandwagon against the government on the other side of the world. And that irks me. It's always irked me on some level. I think that being heroic means challenging people who are more powerful than you. It means
I would agree.
Not going along with the crowd. So, Brent, you are awesome. It's always great to get your insight on things. Do you have anything else you want to just end up with before we conclude?
I just sort of wanted to say this because I was very disappointed with Vaush over that. He has, and I know that Vaush has been able to get some people that otherwise the left wouldn't listen to the left, because he's got sort of that gamer thing. He's kind of like a Destiny who's further to the left. And like, I even had a friend who used to be a fan of his who isn't anymore. And he said, like, man, when I was 15, Vaush would have saved me like a lot of trouble, like just because of, babies first activists. But, the thing is, it's like what we said with Stryker and Mike, when we were like, where were you at Occupy Wall Street? And Stryker was like, I was there for one day. And there's no freaking way. Like, I mean, maybe he was actually there, but he wasn't like there in the sense that like he was there every day at the park. He wasn't taking part in Occupy. He didn't become known to the organizers like you and I did, for instance. And I think at the same time, once again, where was Vaush when we were doing Occupy? And maybe, I don't want to be too much of a gatekeeper here, but I really feel like if someone's going to throw around those accusations at an activist who has paid his dues, who has put in the time, you should at least have done it yourself. You should, I want to see, and that's what I want to see going forward. Like if Vaush watches this, I want to see him at a protest. I want to see him yelling at a line of riot cops. Let's see, put put some skin in the game, and and then come back and try to say, oh, we can't be friends with Marxists because we don't share goals. Because I know damn well that you and I share political goals, again, because we both had skin in the game. We were both in the street at the same time. And that's a personal thing, that's not something that can be put through the internet. But, again, get out there, get in the street, actually put in some time to do some actual leftist organizing as opposed to just streaming.
Well, before we go, how soon until the next issue of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse?
Oh my God! Thank you for asking about that. So the issue number 2, it's 22 pages. Luana is putting in. She finished the color. It's looking great. She's put in. I think the first draft of the dialogue today. I'm going to be looking at it as soon as I'm done. And then I think depending upon how we do it, we may either do the first 22-page issue, or we may try to combine issues 2 and 3 into one, a 44-page. I need to talk with her and Scout and some other things to figure that out, but it should be fairly soon, and I'm really excited to get it out, and I'll get you a copy.
Great. I can't wait. All right. Talk to you soon.